1,000-year-old biblical scroll fragments have now been excavated from caves in the Judean desert during an extremely dangerous rescue operation. In addition to these Bible fragments, the team excavated also a 10,500-year-old perfectly preserved woven basket, the oldest known basket, you see it there on your screen, in world history, plus a 6,000-year-old mummified skeleton of a child, still tucked into its blanket. This was found in what's called the Cave of Horror. It got that name because of its location. It's at the edge of a 260-foot sheer cliff top, flanked by gorges on the side. With us now is Joe Uziel, who is an archaeologist and the head of the Israel Antiquities Authority's Dead Sea Scrolls Unit. Sir, thanks so much for being with me. I want to ask first about something that I think is one of the more interesting things about this discovery. These Bible verses that were written 2,000 years ago they're written almost entirely in Greek. What does that mean?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And we need to think about Greek 2,000 years ago, sort of the same way we think about English today. Greek was the international language, the lingua franca. And so the same way you would find an English Bible today, you'll find Greek biblical books back 2,000 years ago. The scroll fragments that we found are very much of interest in the sense that, first of all, they present a Greek version of the Bible, and we know that there are Greek versions, what's known as the Septuagint. But the one that we have is actually a middle point, sort of between what we call the biblical text as we know it today, okay, the Masoretic text, and the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the text. And what we can see here is basically we're in the process of what's known as canonization of the text, which means the biblical text at this point isn't after its final editing. It's still changing. And we know this from other books as well. For example, in the book of Psalms, we have in other Dead Sea Scrolls that were discovered, entire Psalms that didn't make it into the book of Psalms. And this is another one of those facets of seeing how the biblical text was still changing. And there are slight changes here between this version, the Greek translation as we know it from other places, and the Masoretic text, which is the one that we would read today in Hebrew.
And yet there is at least the word God that is written still in Hebrew. The fragments switch to the word God in Hebrew. Is that for a particular reason, to reach a particular audience?
Well, the reasoning behind it, and it's not just that it's written in Hebrew, because at this point in time, the script used mostly in the scrolls is what we would call square Hebrew writing, which is very, very similar to the Hebrew that we know today. But the name of God appears in this scroll, as well as in other scrolls, in ancient Hebrew letters. And the reasoning behind it is most likely due to the fact that they wanted to use the more holy script in order to write God's name. And anyone who would have read the scroll would have likely recognized that this is God's name, even without necessarily knowing ancient Hebrew, because they would have known these are not Greek letters. What's also interesting is the fact that we're talking about a period where, again, ancient Hebrew script, the ancient Hebrew letters are no longer in use on a day-to-day basis, but we know that the scribes who were able to write the name knew ancient Hebrew as well.
I want to ask also, if I can, about the basket, but also the child's skeleton. This is a mummified skeleton, right? It's still wrapped in its blanket. I mean, is this area, had there been other remains found in this area, in this cave? And what does this signify, perhaps, about what life was like there thousands of years ago?
Well, that's a very, very important part of the entire operation, which has been ongoing now for a while, is that, first of all, we need to know that the desert climate helps preserve finds at a very, very high level. And that's specifically organic finds. And that's the reason that an entire basket that's 10,500 years old, to the best of our knowledge, this is the most ancient basket known. And of course, the mummified child is also another one of these aspects which the desert climate helped preserve for so many years. And what we're able to learn from this operation is, first of all, that the desert was occupied by people for a very, very long period of time, beginning some 10,000 years ago and continuing through. And those peoples reached the desert for different reasons. For example, during the second rebellion of the Jews against the Romans, what's known as the Bar Kokhba revolt, Jews reached this cave in order to try and escape from the Romans. And as you mentioned before, the cave is on a very, very, very sharp cliff. It's very, very difficult to get to. They were trying to get to the edges where they thought they would be safe.
Yeah.
And what's amazing is what they took with them, because they didn't just take food to survive, but they took this scroll written in Greek with the biblical text of the 12 minor prophets.
Yeah, an incredible discovery. Joe Uziel, thank you, sir, so much for your time tonight. Great to have you, and what an incredible find.